we go. Ta-da, pa-pa-pa-pam. Hello. Okay, perfect. I'm going to actually crank this up a little bit. The names, okay. Okay, sorry. Technical troubleshooting. Um, does anybody realize that today's youth have essentially started wearing the clothes of my childhood? It's it's totally freaking me out, man. we we were at the climbing gym yesterday, and I realized that I'm pretty sure I saw like a 16-year-old that was wearing Jinko jeans, which you probably know nothing about. If you had a teenager during the 1990s, you might know this. But they're like the big, super ultra baggy jeans. And I saw 3 of them playing hacky sack. And I was like, what year is this? did I did I enter a time portal and what's going on? But anyways, totally confusing. So we were hanging out with my brother and my sister and my sister-in-law and my niece last night, and it's kind of funny because I'm waiting because Emmy's gonna turn 10 this year. Yeah, I know, the crap. she's not too far away from that herself, and I'm waiting to see when she starts her own style, because there's like that age for girls especially where they kind of wear what their mom wears or what mom has them wear, and I'm waiting to see where which direction is she gonna go, Is she gonna go like goth or I hope so. if only to see my brother scratch his head in confusion. Yeah, she's a great kid. So whatever. Oh yeah, it's lovely. um, so 2 weeks ago, because we took a break last week for the semi-annual meeting. 2 weeks ago, we started to get into Revelation, and I apologize. I'm actually going to take a quick step back. Although, grab your Bibles today, and we are in chapters 1 through 3 because this stuff is going to apply. And if I get through this quick enough, we'll hop back into chapter 1 again and start looking at it. But I thought about it a little bit, and I realized that I kind of like fast-tracked through some of the important stuff. And I was looking back through the questions. You remember day 1, which was like January 6th or whatever, we kind of wrote down a lot of the questions that you had. And I was looking back through those, and I realized that what I actually want to achieve in this class is not necessarily just a walkthrough of Revelation. I want to get to the questions that you had. I want to talk about, I advertised the class as talking about the end times, so I actually do want to address that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I asked on the first day of class, to put it that way, for those of you that registered for this semester of whatever, one of the things that that came up in that first day of class is, what are the do you have friends, family members, loved ones? Do you know people? Have you experienced, essentially the theology of the rapture, right? So people who are convinced that, and not just, I make fun of the whole, people getting vacuumed up into the sky thing, but people that are convinced that the world is going to end because the world is evil, it's bad, and Jesus is going to come back, and Jesus is going to fight all the forces that defy God, and there's going to be an apocalyptic battle, and hopefully the good people will get sucked up and avoid the time of tribulation, but then eventually, it'll all be okay, and then, there'll be 1,000 years. And maybe people don't necessarily track those things specifically, but a lot of us have friends, family members, loved ones, or have experienced this theology, this idea that, which Kester refers to as the script. Oh, jeez Louise. Who's my copy editor? That was supposed to. We'll go to the next slide so you don't have to look at that one. There we go. There we go. Actually, here, hold on. I can edit this on the fly. Boom. Oh, I put it in the wrong place. There we go. Ta-da! The script. But, quick show of hands, how many of you have interacted with people, have friends or family members that believe in some form of this? And have you ever considered what that might mean for how they view the world? Or what they expect, is going to happen, or because if you think the world's going to end soon, kind of changes how you behave and define soon. But if you are at least in some form convinced that that the world is inundated with the powers of darkness, and that this is a sign that things are going poorly and that Jesus will come to fight the powers of darkness, it really changes your kind of overall outlook on God's creation, doesn't it? Go ahead, Pat. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I was going to say ancient peoples, but modern peoples too are fascinated by the meaning of numbers, right? So we know in the Hebrew tradition and the ancient tradition that the number 7 was very important. There are 7 days of creation, according to the Genesis 1. The word for Sabbath, Shabbat, is derived from the number 7. And you can look throughout Scripture to find examples of where 7 was used to indicate, whatever, completeness, wholeness, or just, meaning. Similarly, the number 12, right? Jesus had 12 apostles. There were 12 tribes. There were 12 sons of Jacob. There were 12 generations from Jesus to David and 12 generations from David to Abraham. Who? He did, yeah. It did not say whether or not. It was likely that he did. Just kind of like probabilistic. There's a word, yeah. Statistically speaking, there we go. Statistically speaking, he probably had at least one. You never know. Stranger things have happened. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, the ancient world had a lot of importance of numbers and meaning behind them. And a lot of that is carried forward into even modern times. And sometimes we are aware of it and sometimes not. But, lucky sevens, I don't know how many of you play slot machines all that often, but but that is one of the, as far as I'm aware, one of the numbers that you want to get. Craps. Yeah, yeah. Well, and the funny thing too is, has anybody ever done any reading about the development of our calendars? how much of it really is just kind of guesswork? How much of it is like, well, we're going to adjust this so that we're not, 3.8 seconds over every year, Yes, the Jewish calendar has 10 months, which would make more sense considering we're in a base 10 number system, but no. So, how did I get onto this? Because Pat brought up the number of the beast. When we get to chapter 13, we're going to talk about that a lot, because that is, by the way, you've probably encountered, 666 in popular culture in one form or another extensively over the course of your lifetime. We're fascinated with that kind of thing, the mark of the beast, etc. Additionally, the number 7 and the number 12 pop up significantly in Revelation as well. There's the 144,000, which we're going to mention in a moment, which is 12,000 times 12. It's the 12 tribes of Israel. And, and by the way, that made 144,000 made a ton of sense when there weren't 7 billion people on Earth. It made a ton of sense. That was just a big number back then. Okay, so here's the question we're going to get to today, which is, so you have friends and families, or friends and family members, neighbors, whatever, that have potentially talked to you about, the end times and the rapture. We're going to talk about where that comes from, which again, Kester refers to as the script. So where do they get this stuff from? And when I say they, that it sounds a little bit dismissive, like they're just kind of pulling it out of a hat. Again, remember we talked about this 2 or 3 weeks ago. There are several individuals from the mid-19th century, late 18th to mid-19th century, that are responsible for a lot of this theology. And there's the one guy whose name starts with a D, whose name is escaping me at the moment, who is really kind of front and center. It'll come to me later. But by and large, almost everybody that kind of buys into this, rapture end times theology, it's coming from the same place, which is the dispensationalist. Remember, we talked about the dispensationalist concept. So first of all, here are the formative texts, which we already mentioned. So Daniel chapter 9, and if you want to flip to these in your Bible, go ahead, but I'm gonna kind of work through them kind of quickly. Daniel 9 verses 20 to 27 describes a period, again, number 7, 70 weeks of years that will pass before the end comes. And again, how do you interpret this, right? Because they are interpreting it. A week of years equals 7 years. So there's already an assumption there. There's an assumption that you understand what a week of years means, so 7 years. So one of the things that this indicates is that the clock is running out, that there is a finite time period until the end. Andy, sorry. Oh yeah, 70, yes, that period has passed. Yeah, we missed that. We missed that deadline. Yes, to us, yes. But you'd be, yeah, several. Yeah, the Millerites, the Jehovah's, the precursors to the Jehovah's Witnesses, David Koresh. Who was the most recent one from like 2012? It'll come to me later. But yeah, so this is kind of one of obviously the foundational pieces. The clock is running out, hence the anxiety and the rush. Look busy, Jesus is coming. Yeah, so far. so far, but you'll get it eventually, right? That's the idea. You just keep trying. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Eventually, you'll get it. Another informative text is Thessalonians, specifically 1 Thessalonians. And this is where we get that image of rapture from. So the text describes the faithful being caught up in the air. I thought maybe they were on hoverboards, but this is where we get that image of those who are faithful being raptured away from the earth. And one of the things that a lot of folks will point out, which is, we'll talk about it later, but after chapter 4 in Revelation, the word church isn't used again, up until finally in chapter 22. And so one of the arguments that is made in tandem with this idea of rapture is that, well, that's John indicating that the faithful disappear, right? They're gone. They don't experience all the bad stuff, the tribulation, and then they come back at the end. And they point to the lack of the word ekklesia, which in the Greek. And then we got a kind of a grab bag of stuff. The first letter of John, Second Thessalonians. That, by the way, is a word. If you ever want to tongue tie a French person, have them say Thessalonians, because the THs are really hard. Len, the one that gets Len is Southern, is always terrifying for her. And then Revelation 13. And specifically what comes out of these passages is the image of the Antichrist. So Antichrist is from 1 John, and 2 Thessalonians describes the man of lawlessness, and Revelation 13 describes the beast, which Pat referred us to the mark of the beast being 666. So there's your main antagonist, right? This makes a great story, as always. This is, by the way, inspired a lot of great fiction. How many have seen the movie The Omen with the Damien? Yeah, there's a lot. There's so many good art forms. One of the theories that's out there, and this is based kind of loosely on various interpretations, is that there are a group of 10 nations that will exert influence over the world. This is one of my favorites. And this is, by the way, I'm reading from Kester's second edition. I have both editions. Here's the original one that was published in 2002, I think. And this one, the second edition, came out not too long ago, actually. But one of the things that Kester did was he updated a lot of his reference. So he wrote this one almost right after 9/11. So the contemporary images of doom and gloom and apocalypse were very rife within our world, in terms of, we all remember 9/11, you realize that there are kids now that drive and drink and vote that were born after 9/11? God, what a world. But he updated a lot of his references in this. And, and again, I'm not going to spend this year talking about our current administration, but you understand some of the motivations of folks that the EU, right? How many times has our current leader talked about wanting to get rid of the UN, pull U.S. out of anything resembling, agreements with other nations. And I doubt that this is his motivation, or I doubt that this is the motivation of the administration. But understand that a lot of folks, we refer often as evangelicals, have ulterior motives behind it. And very often it's because they see, they're reading this kind of apocalyptic script into their politics. And so this group of 10 nations, and it's not coincidental, by the way. So shortly after World War II, it started as the European Common Market. And I don't remember which nations were involved, but it was 10 nations that were the initial signatories to the European Common Market. It eventually becomes the European Union, right? And now we have the United Nations, which is many more than 10 nations now. But the idea is, it maintains the same, is that this is a sign of the coming of the end of the world, because these 10 nations, which are trying to exert influence over the world, are signs of that coming. Which, again, this is pulled from various passages in Revelation. And then finally, mark of the beast, Revelation 13:18, 666, the mark of the beast. There's been a lot of debate over what that mark is. Some have said that it is your social security number is the mark of the beast. Is that by letting the government assign a number to you, right? The government, I can't do it very well, is trying to control you. Your credit card number, right, might be the mark of the beast. International product codes, computer chips. Remember when they were putting computer chips in the vaccines? I'm not joking. That was a thing, is that they were putting microchips in the vaccines, and that by getting vaccinated, you were going to get implanted, and that was the mark of the beast, is that they were. And we kind of laugh at this. How many of you are familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect? Dunning-Kruger effect? We got one, Susan. So I'm gonna boil it down in a nutshell. So there's a guy named I forget his first name, Dunning, a guy named Dunning, who did a sociological, psychological study, who basically studying concepts of competence and intelligence. Okay, and one of the things that he observed is that in order to understand what you don't know, you need to know, right? So in other words, in order to understand your ignorance, you need to have at least some amount of knowledge, right? You need to know what you don't know. And one of the conundrums of this, one of the paradoxes, is that there's this sweet spot where you can know just enough to think that you're an expert in something and not realize that you're ignorant, okay? Which explains so much of 2020. It explains ivermectin and, anyways. But, one of the issues is that this actually, the Dunning-Kruger effect describes a lot of how we get this stuff, right? It describes the end of the 18th and the early 19th centuries, which is with, and it's Martin Luther's fault, darn him, with easy access to Scripture and the encouragement to read Scripture, many folks know enough to think they know, but don't know enough to realize how much they don't know. Okay, if that makes sense. John Cleese puts it better. He's like, stupid people just don't know enough to realize they're stupid. But that's a little bit antagonistic. Okay, Revelation 17, the harlot. Of course, no end times prophecy is complete without some misogynistic sex shaming. The harlot is the agent of the new religion who will seduce and compel people into giving up their beliefs. And that is, if you were unaware, the World Council of Churches. So believe it or not, it is mutual agreement and seeking to work together as a means of sharing our faith that is ultimately going to lead to our downfall, because we are compelling people into giving up their true beliefs. Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 talk about the 144,000. Now, you're going to find various interpretations of this. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that there are the 144,000 faithful, which originally back in the late 19th century were the only people that were going to be saved. That was the number, 144,000. Everybody else was out. But then as their numbers passed 144,000, they had to come up with a new scheme. And so I had a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness. I had a friend in talking about word order being very important. I had a friend while I was in high school who was a Jehovah's Witness. Because I was about to say I had a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness in high school. Now, he continued to be a Jehovah's Witness after high school. But he was my friend while I was in high school. And he helped me understand. He explained this to me, which is that, well, there's the 144,000, but then there's the cloud of witnesses, right? So the 144,000 get first-class tickets. Everybody else is flying coach. It's the short version of it, which is that's how I got it. Here, interesting story. His name was Patrick, and he was a really nice guy. Actually, I'm always curious to see what happened to him, because he was a great dude and had some really interesting family dynamics. Which is to say that he had an abusive alcoholic dad, but we're not going down there. Patrick fell down a sinkhole, which is right near my house. And when we're talking about sinkholes, we're not talking about the little ones. Or the ones that all of a sudden pop up in Florida. We're talking about geological formations that are uniquely in Michigan, because Michigan is an island of limestone. So when the glaciers came through, they scraped off a lot of the top surface of stuff, left this limestone base. That's how the Great Lakes are formed, right? The glaciers scraped out these big holes. So if you're in northern Michigan especially, it's all limestone, which means that if you have underground rivers, which you do, it will erode away at this top later and create sinkholes. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over hundreds, if not thousands of years, so it's not a surprise. They are there. The problem is people want to go down into them, because why not? Patrick and his friends were doing something, and he went to throw a stone, and he tripped and fell 200 odd feet down, survived. I'm not entirely, well, there's a lot of soft stuff down there to land on, so, plant life and whatnot. He got lucky. But they couldn't give him a blood transfusion because he's a Jehovah's Witness. And he survived by the skin of his teeth. It was a close one. And I remember, because also the EMTs were our local firefighters, which we knew very well, and we were talking to them after the fact, and they were like, couldn't give him blood. He would have been an easy path for him. I mean, he had a broken arm and a broken leg, but all he needed was a couple of pints to top off, and he couldn't do it. And so what was originally something that could have been relatively, due to modern technology, easily mended, turned into a life-threatening injury because of it, but whatever. That's Patrick. It's interestingly enough, I got to know him in my computer science course, which I don't know if there's any restrictions in that, Joe. Okay. But the script, according to modern kind of end times evangelicalism, articulates that is a sign of 144,000 Jews who will be converted to Christianity. Yeah. How do you know when you've hit that number? Well, that's the question, isn't it? But the idea is that there's this threshold, that 144,000 is a sign of 144,000 Jews who will convert to Christianity, which, by the way, is an inspiration for Jews for Jesus, if you've heard of this institution before. Yeah, us. I mean, and that's being a little bit semantic, but yeah, I mean, Christianity is a Jewish tradition that converts. Yeah, and there are Christians that have converted to Judaism, but for the purposes of fulfilling the end time script, and Pat, you are very faithfully trying to understand the logic of this, trying to put numbers, and you are much more literal than these folks in a lot of ways, which we'll talk about too. So you're being very genuine to something which, for now, take it with a grain of salt. Just understand that that's part of the script. Okay, but again, think about the motivations behind this as well too, Andy. Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. So keep in mind, so the Inquisition is not a single thing, right? There are periods of persecution that happen throughout, the post-Enlightenment period, right? And it depends on a lot of things. The Inquisition was roused to persecute specific ethnic groups of people. So like one of my favorites, one of the most beautiful castles in all of Europe, Carcassonne. Has anybody been to Carcassonne? Carcassonne was the site of another minority ethnic group who were slightly theologically divergent, or at least according to their neighbors who wanted their land. And so they roused up, and I forget the name of it. It's not the Cathars. It's a different group of folks. But they roused. Is it the Cathars? Okay, shouldn't second guess me. Basically, their northern neighbors called an inquisition against them, got the say-so of the Vatican, and they invited all of their neighbors to commit holy war against the Cathars, essentially eradicated them, took all their land, put them in dungeons, tortured them, yay Jesus. By the way, there's a museum of the Inquisition in Carcassonne, which I fully enjoyed. If you ask my wife, she did not think it was that romantic of a destination to go to. I thought it was great. But yeah, Inquisition was all about, persecuting minorities and those who don't. But also, Luther, our own Luther, was convinced that if Jews simply read his logic, his theology of following Jesus, that they obviously would convert to Christianity. And later in life, when he realizes that's not going to happen, that's where his anti-Semitic streak comes out of, is him being frustrated that doesn't happen. But, for our purposes, or for the purposes of the script, this is this idea that, and again, if you think about it not in terms of the numbers, but just in terms of what it indicates every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess, And they're looking to this for signs, right? For signs that this is going to happen. I don't know if there's like a counter somewhere, that they're like 132,214. Yeah, I'm sure it is too. Revelation 16:16, Armageddon. Whew, Great movie with Bruce Willis, Steve Buscemi. Great soundtrack by Aerosmith. Sorry, did anybody see that movie besides me? It's yeah, very bad science in that movie, but it's very entertaining. Where does the word Armageddon come from? Well, it literally means the mountain of Megiddo, which is an actual mountain, okay? And we're not going to go down there, but obviously this is something that gets misinterpreted. It's, again, a reference from our Revelation 16. And so a lot of people well, the script is trying to figure out what this is describing. And so the script points to, again, this is from Ezekiel, because we're pulling in yet more sources. The nation of Gog, which they identify as Russia, and the king of the north. So, Russia is our northern antagonist. That makes sense. Although this is getting really messed up now with the modern international dynamics. Russia, friend or foe, China. Okay. Attacks Israel. So this is one of the indicators that we're waiting for when Russia attacks Israel. Many are arguing that the Syrian conflict is a sign of this, right? Because in the Syrian conflict, you have the Russian, well, they're not anymore, the old regime is out. The new regime is definitely not Israeli supporting, but Syrian conflict was seen as a potential sign of the end times. Conflict escalates into global war, so Russia, the northern king of the north, is joined by the Arabs, the kings of the south. I mean, again, you can see how people are trying to interpret a lot of this stuff. The king of the east, China. I mean, this all makes so much sense, right? And then finally, Christ returns and wins, and there's a bunch of references up there that are pulled from to indicate the victory of Jesus. And then here's where we get to the millennialism finally. So after Jesus wins against the king of the north, the east, and the south, which is the Game of Thrones plot as well too, Satan will be bound for 1,000 years. People will live long and peaceful lives. So this is, they're raptured. They don't have to live through the tribulation. They come back for their 1,000-year reign, and they get to enjoy the paradise that exists. During that time period, the natural order is transformed. The lion will lay down with the lamb. Plowshares will be turned, or swords will be turned into plowshares, etc., etc. And finally, we let Satan back out for a final cage match with Jesus, and that is when the world ends. Third coming, even, yeah, right. Because the second coming is when Jesus comes back to. Oh yeah, no, he gets beat. They lock him up for 1,000 years, and then they bring him out like Mike Tyson to fight Jake Paul. Well, I mean, there's no why. It's just this is what the Bible says, Andy. I know, I'm playing with you here. It's just what the Bible says, Andy. I don't make it up. Well, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that. Okay. So we've heard the script. Let's poke some holes in it. Okay? So what are the problems with the script? First thing, maybe the most important, is that you are taking a mechanistic view of prophecy in order for all this to make sense. And as an aspiring biblical scholar, this is one of the things that's hardest for me, is because it totally misunderstands the purpose and the function of prophecy. Okay, prophecy is not Madame Cleo, looking into a crystal ball to give you lottery numbers, right? Prophecy is looking at the world as it is, and speaking the word of God as a critique into that. And articulating the consequences of our current choices, right? Martin Luther King, prophet, right? Martin Luther, you could argue as well, prophet, okay? It's people that are looking at the world and saying, this is what's wrong. This is God's critique, God's word speaking into this. And for me, as an aspiring biblical scholar, when you turn prophecy into fortune telling, you devalue prophecy. You devalue the word of God, which has an authentic, honest, and genuine critique of us, of what we do, right, to each other. Who? Sure. I mean, there's no there's no checklist for this, right? There's no, these are the prophets. I mean, because, again, we've been reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 12 these past couple weeks. Paul articulates how everyone, at least in some meaningful way, might take on the role as prophet, might be gifted with the gift of prophecy. I mean, have you ever been a prophet into the life of your child? Looked at their choices and said, now this might be strange to you, but believe it or not, I have some wisdom built on experience that the path you're currently on is not a good one. And I can tell you with a relative amount of certainty that if you continue on this path, these are going to be the consequences you're going to experience, right? That's prophetic in its own way. It's what the prophetic word does, okay? The problem with this mechanistic view is that the Bible also just doesn't really work that way. So one of the big holes is if you read Daniel chapter 9, which is where we get a lot of this 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Daniel 9:26 stops, and according to the script, there's this pause, and then Daniel 27 picks up 2,000 years later. And we're not going to get into the details today. If you want to flip to it, you'll understand, or you can begin to understand what's going on. But this is one example of how the biblical witness does not fall neatly into this kind of mechanistic view of piecing all these disparate parts together to make a consistent, cohesive narrative. Okay. A lot of the calculations depend on specific wording and punctuation of the King James and NIV translation. The NIV is which is not a bad translation, by the way, but it is a contemporary reimagining of the King James. So the NIV maintains a lot of these same choices that the King James version. So the problem is that you are basing some very important interpretations, assumptions, choices off of things that actually are not original to the text. There is no punctuation in either the Greek New Testament nor the Hebrew Old Testament, okay? These 1,000-year later editors put things like punctuation and subtitles to make it more intelligible. We make translational choices, but I'm placing heavy emphasis in the word choice. So much of the script is based off of specific choices, okay? Specific choices. And again, we're gonna see those as they pop up over the course of this study. They commonly and often that's not a word. They commonly and often paraphrase the Old Testament. Paraphrases is not a word. Paraphrases, there's another typo. It's supposed to be ES, the Old Testament, but they never quote it verbatim. And here's where you arrive at one of the real big conundrums, which is that folks that follow the script will often articulate that they read the Bible literally, but then in order for a lot of these very mechanistic things to work out, they have to quote the Old Testament figuratively, okay? And you can't have both, all right? If you're going to use biblical literalism as a basis for your arguments, you can't use metaphor, right? You can't paraphrase or use figurative language if you actually read, Daniel or Joel literally, it doesn't match up as neatly with your script. Okay? Neither Daniel nor Revelation refers to the rapture, okay? So, if the rapture is a big part of your end times theology, you at least have to acknowledge that you're pulling it from a different source. You're pulling it from Thessalonians. And this is, Kester later gets to this as well too, is the very patchwork nature of the script, where, you are pulling from so many different sources to make up this quilt of a narrative. There's no distinction between the church and Israel, and this might seem like a minor thing, but one of the major foundational pieces for this end times rapture theology is this assumption that that Israel as the nation continues as a separate thing, and that we, the church, the ecclesia, are a separate thing. and a lot of the conflict therein is a result of that. Except that you don't find that distinction anywhere in the New Testament. And one of the reasons, and we've actually talked about this in our study of early Christian history, is that there really is no point in the New Testament canon in which Christianity begins to see itself as something distinct or separate from their Jewish roots, right? And in fact, if you were to talk to, because again, the New Testament canon runs from about 0 Common Era, 4 BC, up through about 150, and that's very generous, more likely around 120 Common Era. During that time period, Christians still see themselves as part of Israel, okay? Even though they have begun to follow Jesus, they would still understand their identity to be Jewish. They don't leave that ethnicity behind or that cultural identity behind. A lot of the script for Revelation or for the end times theology depends on this separation, that there is Israel over here and there is Christianity over here, which from a modern perspective we definitely can do, right? But that didn't exist when these texts were written. Okay. And then finally, we already referred to this. It confuses the literal and the symbolic. You can't do both. Right? If you're going to read something literally, you got to be consistent in your literalism. You can't all of a sudden make specific choices to interpret something symbolically or figuratively. And this goes all the way back to the origins of this. I referenced the dispensationalists at the beginning, is that they argue that the biblical prophecies must be taken literally, but their own readings are able to be figurative. So again, a lot of hypocrisy. And in case you thought that this was a passé thing, which obviously we've established that it wasn't, here's just a couple of references to show how people have tried to contemporize a lot of these issues. So here's kind of an ongoing, or here's a current-ish script of, for example, we're going to read about the seven trumpets soon, indicating the trumpets in the text are indicating various things that have happened. So, hail and fire from heaven, that's obviously World War I, the Blitz, obviously. Fiery mountain is the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. Again, 9/11, there was this renewed fascination with Nostradamus, who also makes reference to a fiery mountain, and there was some assumptions that the Twin Towers were the fiery mountain. I can't remember, there was something interesting there. This is the one that I find the most fascinating. The Chernobyl incident is Wormwood. It's the star that's called Wormwood. I don't know how, I guess a nuclear reactor could be a star, but apparently Chernobyl means Wormwood. Trumpet 4, the darkening sky, and this is where you move from the literal into and these are all figurative, right? None of these are literal. You have to figuratively contemporize these things. The darkening sky is indicating the increasing rapidity with which these things are happening. The sky is darkening. It's rushing. It's hurrying. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a sign of the end times, apparently, because it indicated a rapidly changing international dynamic. Okay, how many of you remember? I was 8 and 7. Sorry. But how many of you remember what it was like to be alive during that time? It was crazy, right? Absolutely. Cool in a lot of ways. Like, holy cow, the world is changing, because that was such a norm for, 40 years, and then to have it, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Trumpet 5, smoke from the abyss is obviously the fires in Kuwait after the invasion of Iraq. Duh. The iron locusts are the helicopters, okay? Trumpet 6 is ISIS, right? Because they're the demonic armies from the Euphrates, which the Tigris and the Euphrates, are the breadbasket of civilization. It's the two rivers in the Middle East that form, okay. And finally, trumpet 7 is TBD. God's kingdom has not yet arrived according to the script. So here's the important question, which we're going to take with us. What do we do with it? So how do we read this stuff? Okay, and we have a choice here, right? We have a choice here. And Christianity, which we talked about this, has actually debated this for a lot of time, which is, do we read this? Do we value anything in Revelation? Because that is a choice. That is a choice that Luther debated about is, does this actually inform our faith at all? Right? And he went back and forth on it. Originally when he was younger, he thought this was a bunch of malarkey. But later on in life, he did a commentary on Revelation and thought more about how it might be informative. And again, the two terms that he advocated, which I think I have up there, are warning and comfort. Okay. So here's the thing. We can't treat it like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay? We can't divide it up into its component pieces and rearrange them to make them fit our narrative. Okay? And again, that's what's happening with the script. And not only are you cutting Revelation up like a jigsaw puzzle, you're also taking pieces from other puzzles and putting them in to make a new picture, right? Anybody jigsaw puzzle fans? Yeah, we went through a big jigsaw puzzle phase during COVID, believe it or not. I don't know if anybody else did. Our neighbor is such a puzzler. She does so many puzzles that she actually has back problems. And so she has, I didn't know these existed, she has a personal puzzle tray, which is like something that she can strap over her shoulders. Yeah. So you can take the puzzle with you and you don't have to bend over. Yeah. Vicky's hardcore, although I think she's taking a break because she's continuing to have back problems. Everybody's got their thing, Everybody's got their thing that they like doing. But yeah, we can't mix and match pieces. Our task, as with everything, is to create a complete picture of what Revelation is about, which is, this should be no surprise to us. This is what I advocate for every week, right? Is read the whole chapter, right? Don't. Okay, here's the gospel text for this week. It's like 8 verses from, Luke 2. That's great. It's, great for the purposes of the sermon, but read the whole thing. Get the context of what's going on. And, maybe even do the extra credit, read Luke before we, spend a year preaching on the Gospel of Luke. You'll find yourself a lot more prepared. More information, not less, right? We want people to have access to as much information as they can. We don't want to restrict it to little bite-sized pieces that articulate our version, right? Here's probably one of the most important things for the actual reading of Revelation is the nonlinear nature of it, okay? So, how many of you are, enjoy reading stuff? I asked this question a couple weeks. How many are nonfiction folks? Yeah, okay, yeah. And how many of you are fiction folks? Yeah, and how many of you do both? Yeah, okay, fair enough. There are some people that are just like, there is nothing but nonfiction, right? I don't want to read something that somebody else made up. I want to learn something. I want, one of our friends' dads is like that. He's insufferable. No, that's not true at all. He's a great guy, actually. He's a great guy. I don't get him, but he's great. So the thing about stories is that, by and large, your simplest story follows this kind of trajectory, right? Where, it's linear insofar as that there's rising action, a crisis point, and following action. This is what a good story looks like, right? Because the whole point is you're building up. The fun stuff happens, and then they wrap it up, right? Okay. But by and large, if you're following the timeline of that narrative, you're starting at point A and you're arriving at point B, okay? But obviously, there are books, stories that subvert this, that follow a different track. Some of the best examples of human stories are the ones that play with the timeline. Anybody think of examples of stories that play with the timeline a little bit? I know, it's hard to think of it on the spot. I have never seen that. This Is Us. Okay, I haven't seen it. It jumps back and forth. That is one way that, flashbacks is a fantastic tool for writers and screenwriters to introduce information without talking about it, right? Without exposition, right? So it's a great way to introduce backstory or context for a character without just having them tell it to you, right? Oh my gosh, Groundhog Day, don't get me started. Yeah, Groundhog Day is this, right? What's that? Oh, the Stephen King book. I haven't read that. I've heard it's really good though. Yeah. Okay. 11/22/63, which is about the JFK assassination, but with many twists to it. Yeah. One of the movies that was very popular when I was growing up was the movie Memento. Has anybody seen that one? Christopher Nolan movie. It starts with the end and goes backwards. Yeah. What a great, and it's kind of one of those things where it works once, but he can't make it, and he didn't, to his credit. Christopher Nolan didn't try to do that. But you can't use that script, not like M. Night Shyamalan, who's had the same movie script for every movie he's ever made. He's the guy that did The Sixth Sense. Anybody see that? If you've seen The Sixth Sense, you've seen every M. Night Shyamalan movie. We don't know what's going on, but wait, there's a twist, and then, the twist can only happen. But the point is that we utilize nonlinear narratives to do a lot of things, to make the story more interesting, but also as a way of, again, introducing information without just having it being exposition, also of indicating specific ideas. And again, I'm trying to think of a good example here. But one of the things about Revelation is that Revelation is a very nonlinear book, okay? Insofar as that if you track the events that are being described, you'll see that they happen in cycles. And one of the specific ways to track it is when John describes the darkening of the sun and the moon, okay? And if you read through Revelation with an eye for detail, you'll realize that this happens, I think, 3 times over the course of the book. And if you're reading it already knowing what it's about, so like if you're reading it with a script in hand, right, because you know this is about the rapture and the end of the world, these are the things you can kind of gloss over. Of course, you wouldn't be reading it literally anymore, but who am I to challenge that? But if you pay attention to the detail, which you would do if you're trying to understand Revelation as a whole, right, and not just jigsaw puzzle pieces that you mix and match to make it fit your narrative, you would ask the question, well, what's going on there? And so what you realize is what John of Patmos is effectively doing is he's doing something like this. So here's point A, and here's point B, right? And so throughout the narrative, he essentially comes back on his story over and over again. And here's the fun part. Why? Why? And we can come up with a couple of reasons, off the top of our heads without even reading the book. I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, is that this is a great way to help people remember the things that you're talking about. And again, this is a letter that in the letter itself, John encourages to be heard, right? So this is a letter that's being read aloud to these 7 communities and more, right? But it's something that you're going to hear. Anybody try to listen to, I don't know how long it would take to read Revelation end to end. More than 45 minutes, that's for sure. But how many of you listen to Audible books or podcasts? Right? Do you ever find yourself having to rewind because your attention lapsed for a bit and you have to go back? Listening to a story, while beautiful, can be tough sometimes, and so a good author will remind you of what they talked about. Who likes watching episodic TV? Yeah. In other words, we all do, whether you realize it or not. But what happens at the beginning of a lot of TV shows? The recap, which I always skip through, and Ellen yells at me. Because I remember what happened last week. She probably does too. She just wants a reminder to prep her. If we ever divorce, that'll be why. Because me skipping the recap. She also, God bless her, we were watching Slow Horses. Yeah. Which has a fantastic soundtrack to it. And she doesn't want it so much. Well, number one, she does need to watch the recap because Slow Horses has a lot of detail in it. But she likes the sound, the opening track, and she wants to listen to it. I'm like, can we just get to the good stuff? Anyway. It's a TV show, TV series. It's got Gary Oldman in it. Oh, dude, this is one of my. I'll give you the cliff note or the short pitch. It is very PG-13 to rated R, but not in an American version of it, which means that it's sex and violence. There is some violence. Gary Oldman is a vile, but not morally, well, somewhat morally so. He is a vile, disgusting, grumpy, curmudgeonly human being who smells bad, who is the head of a unit of MI5, the British intelligence service, but it's all the misfits. He is in charge of the misfits of MI5. And Slow Horses, it's based off a novel series called Slough House, SLOUGHHOUSE, but it's Slow Horses, SLOWHOE. Okay. Apple Plus. So when you do your Apple Plus cycle, put that one on your list, along with Ted Lasso and all the other Apple Plus movies. Is Severance on Apple Plus too? Can't remember. Anyways, okay. Shrinking, yeah. We got time. Yes. 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 You're jumping ahead, but yes. No. It's good because this is a great way also to remind me that we're nearing 10:40, and I should probably be thinking about how I'm gonna wrap this up. And I'll go back to, I erased the words, but Luther's metric was warning and comfort. Warning and comfort. So anyways, we're gonna come back to this because again, this is the framework through which Revelation is read, is these cycles of narrative. And in fact, that is how, I've got it up there. Yay me. So here are the specific cycles that you see, or the loops, the spirals in Revelation. And this is how we're dividing up the readings. So 7 messages to the churches, chapters 1 through 3. That's one cycle. I don't know how many loops I put up here. The 7 seals, that's got some of the best stuff in it. The 7 seals. That's where you get the pale horse, or the pale rider on the horse called Death. And another great movie, Pale Rider, did not age super well for various reasons. Anyways, still a great movie. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, which we just read. 3. How many have? 4, 5, 6. There we go. The unnumbered visions. We'll call it UV. Sorry. I guess that can just put up forth there. And then the 7 plagues, and then finally more unnumbered visions that takes us to the end. And now here's the cool thing, and this is how Kester kind of marks these cycles, is that at the end of each cycle we talked about warning and comfort, is the triumphal vision. So what you have is the triumphal vision, which is the throne room, which is the four beasts of the earth, surrounded by the council of elders, surrounded by the 144,000, surrounded by the multitudes, and at the center is the Lamb who was slain. This is the vision, this is the image that John cycles back to at the end of all of these visions. So this is the triumphal vision. So again, we talk about warning and comfort. What John is effectively doing is he's saying, here is the warning. Here are the things that we're seeing maybe in our world, right? Here are the trials, the tribulations, the persecutions, all the things that we're seeing, okay? And I'm going to remind you about the vision of the divine. I'm going to remind you about Christ's inevitable victory. And here's more warning. Here's more awful things that we see happening in the world around us that I'm relaying to you. I'm speaking for the voice of John right now. That I'm relaying to you figuratively and metaphorically, talking about, the harlot or the beast or whatever. These are probably things that the 7 churches are seeing happening in their world, right? Whether it's 7 emperors of Rome, or whether it's the Senate, or whether it's the council, whoever that is. And then I'm going to remind you of Christ's triumphant vision, victory, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera, until finally we get the final vision of triumphant victory, which is the new city descending to earth. So it is not, and this is, This is where I get really worked up. It is not humanity escaping to the clouds. It is the dwelling place of God descending to earth. So, and literally says, and God will make his home amongst mortals. So it is literally the opposite of humanity escaping the earth. It is God being more imminent. It is God being more present, not less so, okay? And you get so much, so this is, our hymnody, so much. I have a little book called Occasional Services, which is you have to buy it as a pastor. Actually, I got mine gifted to me when I got ordained. Thank goodness I didn't have to buy it. But it's got everything that's not in the ELW or not in the LBW, right? Depending on which version of it. So it's got baptism in time of an emergency. It also has the committal service, which I have participated in with many of you here. I've done committal services either at Willamette National or wherever. Which I'm running over time. That's okay. Back in ye old days, read 40 years ago, right? You would do a funeral in the church. You would pick up the casket. You would walk it out the front doors of the church to the graveyard, right? The graveyard is different than a cemetery because the graveyard is the yard of the church, which has the graves in it. You would walk the casket out of the front doors of the church to the graveyard, and then you would do the committal. So it's all part of actually the same service. In modern setting, where you get buried at Willamette National and your service is here or whatever, we divide those two things, okay? And so we will do a celebration of life or a memorial service or a funeral here. And then sometimes, when folks invite me or want me to do it, I'll come to the graveside service where they're doing the internment, whether it's an urn or a casket or whatever their loved one's remains are taken, and we place it in the ground, right? And I say, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But two of the really big readings that I have the option to read, because everything is contextual, are Revelation 21 and Revelation 22. Because Revelation 21 and Revelation 22 are God triumphing over death, right? So obviously we would read this during a committal service, okay? And I just want us to understand, okay, hold on. I think I have one more slide. Yes. This is the benefit of reading Revelation as a whole thing, right? Rather than chopping it up and Frankensteining it to fit a script that tells a story that we want it to tell, when we read Revelation as a narrative in its entirety, we hear the story that John's trying to tell, right? Which is pointing out the things that are going on that we're seeing in the world around us and reminding us about God's power over evil and darkness, and reminding us that the victory is already complete, already assured. I already mentioned comfort mourning. That's Luther's thing. Yeah, I already said this stuff. Great. All right, folks. So next week we will actually pick up with chapters 1 through 3, the first cycle. We're going to talk about the letter to the 7 churches. And if we have, I'm anticipating that we're going to move fast through it because we already talked about some of it. We'll get to chapters 2 or 4 through 6, or 4 through 7, which is the 7 seals. So if you want to read ahead, read up through chapter 7. If you don't, whatever, just show up. We'll still love to have you. Okay. Thank you.